The Senate Hall on Coruscant had been designed for applause. Its height existed to humble the eye. Its polished stone existed to reflect authority upward until power looked divine. Its tiers of light, the slow turning galleries, the immaculate white ribs of the vaulted ceiling, all of it had been made for one purpose, long before the Empire had learned to wrap itself in banners and iron, to make obedience feel beautiful. Now it did something else. It made ghosts easy to mistake for living women. Darth Vader entered beneath a hush that spread ahead of him like frost. Conversations thinned. Assistants lowered their eyes. Minor officials pressed themselves subtly aside, each one pretending not to notice how the sound of his respirator altered the room. He moved through the chamber with the black certainty of a verdict already signed. The hearing was not for him. It concerned supply routes, taxes, inspection rights, the patient suffocation of worlds, still naive enough to believe procedure could delay conquest. Bail Organa had requested review. Several old families of the Senate remnant had lent their names to the complaint. The Emperor had sent Vader in place of courtesy. That alone should have made the morning ordinary. Then he saw her. She was standing in one of the white arcs of light that fell from the upper windows, speaking softly with an aide near the outer railing. Her gown was not Padme's. It was simpler, cleaner, severe in its elegance, ivory instead of ceremonial white, cut for a young senator's daughter who understood scrutiny and refused to bend beneath it. Her hair was arranged high and practical. There were no jeweled headdresses, no Naboo ornament, no attempt at spectacle. And yet the turn of her head struck him with such force that for a suspended instant the machinery inside his chest seemed to forget its rhythm. Not because she was identical, because she was not. If she had been identical, the illusion would have broken immediately. Memory would have rejected the falsehood. But this was worse. The resemblance lived in places that did not belong to faces alone. The line of her throat as she listened, the stillness before she answered, the controlled patience that concealed fire instead of softness, the sense that politeness on her was only ever armor for conviction. She turned fully, and in the set of her mouth he saw a queen in a meadow on Naboo, smiling with secret amusement while pretending to be less dangerous than she was. His hand tightened. The panel beneath his glove creaked. Princess Leia Organa looked toward him because everyone eventually looked toward him. Fear drew eyes the way gravity drew falling metal. Her gaze met the dark lenses of his mask. Unlike the others, she did not look away at once. That was the second wound, not the face. The defiance. She inclined her head with the exact degree of respect protocol demanded, and not a grain more. Then she returned to her conversation. Vader stood motionless. Somewhere in the room a clerk resumed breathing too loudly. Bail Organa crossed the polished floor to greet him with controlled distaste, offering formal words neither of them meant. Vader heard none of it. His senses had narrowed to the woman in white across the chamber, and the dead world breaking open under his ribs. Padme. No. Impossible. Foolish. Beneath him. And yet when the hearing began, he found the shape of that old name moving through his thoughts like a submerged blade. Princess Leia took the floor near the close of the session. She had not been expected to speak. That much became obvious from the irritation on several senior faces, including those nominally allied to her household. She rose only when an imperial administrator, soft with comfort and sharp with cowardice, described the blockade of a frontier corridor as regrettable but necessary. His language was neat. His cruelty had been powdered until it resembled policy. Leia asked permission to address the chamber. Permission was granted because denial would have looked weak. She did not raise her voice. That was not her method. She spoke with clarity so clean it made evasion sound filthy by comparison. She spoke of medicine waiting in customs holds, while villages rationed air filters and bacta. She spoke of ships detained because sympathy had become suspicious, and compassion had begun to resemble sedition in imperial documents. She spoke as if facts were enough to shame monsters. But it was not merely the argument that opened the old wound wider. It was the moral certainty beneath it, the refusal to flatter power, the belief, still somehow alive in her, that government existed to protect the vulnerable rather than teach them to kneel. He had heard such conviction once under Naboo's skies, and once in private chambers lit by soft gold, where a woman had argued with him as if love made honesty gentler. He had heard it in the Senate when Padme Amidala stood against fear disguised as security. He had heard it when she still believed democracy might survive if enough good people refused to surrender it piece by piece. The girl in white finished speaking. No, not a girl, he corrected with cold annoyance, because the correction did nothing to quiet the unease. A young woman. Leia Organa sat down without visible triumph. She had not performed. She had testified. The chamber responded with scattered murmurs, discomfort, some admiration hidden inside caution. The administrator offered a dry reply, thick with condescension. Bail touched 2 fingers lightly to the table beside him, the smallest warning for restraint. Leia ignored it. For the remainder of the hearing, Vader said almost nothing. When he did speak, his voice ended all discussion. He gave the Emperor's answer. The blockade would remain. Additional review would be conducted into Alderaanian relief channels. Cooperation would be expected. Failure would be remembered. He could feel her looking at him when he said it, not frightened, appalled, as if she had hoped, against reason, that even inside the black armor there might still be a listener. When the session ended, the hall emptied slowly, people lingering in clumps of false business to avoid leaving Vader's proximity. Bail Organa moved to intercept his daughter before she could wander within reach of Imperial notice. Too late. Vader stepped into her path with the inevitability of a descending gate. Princess Organa. Lord Vader. Her tone was cool enough to frost the syllables. I hope the hearing proved useful. To the Empire, yes. She held his gaze. That was not what I asked. Bail arrived at once, every line of him controlled. My daughter is young enough to believe officials should answer honest questions honestly. Then she is old enough to learn disappointment, Vader said. Leia should have withdrawn. Any sensible young noble would have done so. Instead, she said, disappointment is not the same thing as surrender. Padme had said something like that once on a night balcony above Theed, her hair loose in the wind, her smile fierce with impossible hope. The memory struck so hard, he felt the old name flash through him like heat. Bail noticed something change. Vader sensed it. The senator's body stiffened almost imperceptibly. Leia saw it too, saw some disturbance she could not name beneath the mask. For a breath too long, Vader said nothing. Then, more softly than she expected, he asked, Do you believe people can change, Princess? The question was wrong for the corridor, wrong for him. wrong in a way that chilled the air more than threat would have. Leia frowned. Anyone can change. The question is whether they want to. And if they have gone too far. She did not hesitate. Then they go farther because they choose to. Bale stepped closer. We should return to our transport. Leia was still watching Vader. Why do you ask me that? Because once a woman he loved had believed redemption was merely courage told in the right order. Because he wanted, suddenly and monstrously, to hear the answer spoken in a voice shaped like hers. Because something impossible had begun moving under the ash, and he did not know whether he wanted to smother it or kneel before it. He gave none of that. Because you speak as though certainty is a virtue, he said. Sometimes it is. She left with Bale then, white skirts whispering over the polished floor, and Vader remained in the corridor, listening to the fading rhythm of their steps, until the silence after them became unbearable. That night aboard his flagship, he ordered a full intelligence brief on Princess Leia Organa. He told himself it was tactical. Bail Organa's daughter was already active in relief networks. Her speeches carried beyond Alderaan. Her education, associations, and travel patterns might reveal channels of descent useful to the Emperor. The order was rational, necessary. The lie tasted clean at first. Then the recordings began. Vader dismissed everyone from the chamber, the doors sealed. Holographic files rose into blue life around him. Public addresses, diplomatic receptions, educational transcripts, travel manifests, surveillance stills taken from Senate balconies and starport corridors. Leia across a landing platform with wind pulling loose strands from her hair. Leia arguing with a customs officer whose rank outran his conscience. Leia seated at Bale's side, composed, intelligent, alert to every undercurrent in the room. He watched the recordings again and again. The first time he looked for resemblance. The second time he looked for proof. By the fourth, he no longer understood the difference. There were things no file should have shown him. A slight narrowing of the eyes when anger sharpened into contempt. The way she folded composure around grief instead of surrendering to it. The way compassion appeared in her, not as softness, but as refusal. A motion of the hand when she dismissed foolishness. A lift of the chin when someone mistook youth for weakness. Each detail by itself meant nothing. Together they began to feel like mockery arranged by the Force. He stood before a still image of her speaking beneath the chandeliers of the hall on Coruscant. She was caught mid-sentence, her face turned partly away, the light pale across her cheek. She would have said that, he murmured. The words escaped before he understood what he had done. Not Leia. She. As if the dead woman and the living one had already begun to blur. He shut the projection off with a violent gesture. Darkness swallowed the chamber, leaving only the sound of his own breathing and the invisible pressure of old pain reawakening in rooms he had sealed long ago. Meditation did not help. The dark side welcomed fury, not confusion. When he knelt within the circle of his private chamber and reached into himself for the clean geometry of hatred, memory answered instead. Naboo sunlight, Padme's laughter under her breath when protocol bored her. Her face in the dark of a transport as she slept sitting upright, because duty had exhausted even her. Her hand against his when words had failed them. Her eyes on Mustafar, enormous with devastation, asking him what he had become. He rose so abruptly that machinery in his armor hissed protest. The next report came within a day. Leia was traveling to Brental on relief business. Inspections along the route could be justified. Vader altered the patrol order himself. The detention was brief, legal by Imperial standards, and conducted with scrupulous public politeness. Her vessel was held in the bay of an orbital customs station, while officers searched manifests they had no intention of clearing quickly. Bail was not with her. That mattered more than it should have. Leia descended the ramp alone, flanked by 2 attendants who could not conceal their fear. She was dressed in traveling gray, severe and practical, but the silver fastening at her shoulder caught the light and made something old in him ache. She demanded an explanation before her feet had fully touched deck plating. "You were informed of an inspection," said the station commander. "I was informed of harassment with stationery," Leia replied. Vader stepped from the shadow of the bay. Everything in her posture changed, not weaker, sharper. "Lord Vader." "Princess, if this inspection is your work, I hope you found the medicine and water filters very threatening." Threat often disguises itself as mercy, only when the Empire defines it. The commander looked desperately between them, realizing too late that he had become a scenery in a conversation he did not understand. Vader dismissed him with a glance. The attendants were escorted away. Soon the vast bay held only the 2 of them. The echo of distant machinery, and the great dark hull of her ship like a witness, too frightened to intervene. Vader moved closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to feel the gravity of her presence. "Do you ever feel," he asked, "as though your life was chosen before you understood it?" Her expression flickered. "That is an unusual question for a customs inspection. Answer it." "No." The certainty of it arrested him. "No." "My life is my own," she said. "Inherited responsibilities are not the same as destiny." He searched her face as if another answer might appear there, if he waited long enough. "And memory. Do you believe it survives in blood?" What an ugly way to talk about family. He should have ended it, released her, closed the door before the obsession found new language. Instead, he asked, "Have you ever mourned someone you never knew?" This time she stared, not frightened now, disturbed. "Why?" she said slowly. "Are you asking me these things?" "Because the dead will not stay dead if your voice keeps sounding like hers in the wrong light. Because you stand where the Force should never have placed you. Because I hear an echo and do not know whether it is miracle or punishment." The respirator filled the silence. Leia took a step back. It was small, but he noticed it. "You are not questioning me about politics." "No." The truth landed between them like a blade. "Then what are you doing?" He had no answer fit for speech. The chamber seemed suddenly narrower, the air harsher. She was looking at him as though he were not merely dangerous, but broken in some concealed and spreading way. That look touched the rawest part of him. Pity. Curiosity. The beginning of understanding without the shelter of full knowledge. He turned from her abruptly. "Your ship is cleared," he said. She did not move. "That is not good enough." "It is what you have." "Then whatever game this is, I advise you to end it now." He faced her again. There it was. Not Padme's face. Not Padme's life. but the exact same impossible refusal to be managed by fear. For the briefest instant, he wanted to tell her to run. Instead, he said, "Be careful, Princess. There are truths you are not prepared to carry." Leia's jaw tightened. "Then keep them away from me." She returned to her ship without once looking back. Vader remained in the bay long after departure clearance, staring at the empty platform where she had stood until the silence began to sound like accusation. From then on, the encounters multiplied, not recklessly. Never so obviously that even Imperial notice would name the pattern. A transport delayed here, a document review there, a reception where security changed at the last moment, and Vader was present instead of a governor. A private summons justified by questions about Alderaanian charitable front organizations. He never touched her, never threatened her in the ordinary manner his reputation promised. The restraint itself became its own form of dread. Leia began to understand that the Empire was not simply watching her. He was. And he watched as though trying to remember a song from hearing only its shadow. She tested him more than once, sometimes with deliberate provocation, sometimes with sincerity, sharp enough to cut through theater. In one meeting on Coruscant, in a narrow gallery lined with old Republic statues now dimmed beneath Imperial banners, she asked him whether he ever tired of serving men who mistook terror for order. He should have answered with menace. Instead, he said, "Order survives longer than innocence." That is what frightened people tell themselves after they help murder it. The words were Padme's in spirit, if not in memory. The chamber reeled around him. He saw not the gallery, but the Senate. Years ago, her voice clear over the murmur of compromise. He saw a woman in white on Naboo, speaking of liberty as if the word itself could still protect children from armies. He saw her on Mustafar, hand trembling against the swell of her unborn child, whispering that there was still good in him. Always that. Always the unbearable tenderness of someone who believed what he had ceased to deserve. His hand lifted before he knew it, not to strike, to touch. Leia went still. The black glove stopped a breath from her cheek. "Padme," he said. The name emerged not as command, but as wound. Then the moment shattered. Breath roared through his mask. He dropped his hand as though burned. Leia's face had changed. The anger remained, but beneath it something colder now moved. Not recognition. Not yet. But the certainty that she had stepped into the center of an old ruin, and that the ruin had a name. "Who?" she asked, each syllable precise. "Is Padme?" He turned and left her there among the dead statues without answering. That night, the Emperor summoned him. Palpatine's chamber was all shadows and soft light, designed not for comfort but for imbalance. The old man sat beneath a long window overlooking the endless city of Coruscant, fingers folded, expression mild in the way venom sometimes appeared still before it struck. "My friend," he said, "you have seemed distracted." Vader bowed his head. "No, my master." Palpatine smiled faintly. "Lying to me remains a poor habit." Silence. The Emperor rose and moved toward the window. Below them the city plunged in tiers of light so deep it no longer resembled architecture. It looked like a fall paused mid-descent. "You have taken unusual interest in Alderaan," Palpatine said, "in Bail Organa's daughter specifically. She may be useful. Perhaps." The smile sharpened. Or perhaps pain has found a new shape in which to tempt you. The name was not spoken. It did not need to be. Vader said nothing. Palpatine studied the reflected mask in the glass. Grief is not weakness, if it is weaponized, but obsession. He let the word drift. Obsession is only useful when one holds the leash. I am in control. Yes, said the Emperor, amused. That is what frightened men tell themselves after desire begins to choose for them. Vader left with the old poison settling deeper under his thoughts. He knew he was being observed. He knew Palpatine scented fracture and would gladly widen it if chaos promised stronger chains. Yet the warning altered nothing. If anything, it made the hunger more secretive, more intense. He doubled surveillance. He requested older archives concerning Padme Amidala, under pretexts too convoluted for anyone but him to follow. He watched Leia's speeches in private, and heard echoes until echoes began to feel like voices. Leia, meanwhile, began her own investigation. It started with the name, Padme. She asked Bail over an evening meal on Alderaan, making her tone casual enough to fool no one who knew her. He was quiet for too long. The servants withdrew. The silver on the table reflected candlelight in warped rings. "Where did you hear that?" he asked. "From Vader." The color left his face so completely, it frightened her more than any answer could have. "Tell me," she said. Bail set down his utensil with exaggerated care. "Some truths are dangerous before their time." "So they exist?" "Yes." "Does Vader know Mother?" That silence was different, heavier, full not merely of caution but grief. "Knew," Bail said at last. "Not knows." Leia's pulse quickened. "So Padme is connected to Mother." Bail looked at her and saw at once that evasion had become impossible. He had always known this day might come. He had simply hoped the galaxy would be kinder in choosing when. "Your mother's name," he said quietly, "was Padme Amidala." The room changed, not physically. Yet everything seemed to shift out of the familiar arrangement it had worn all her life. The candles, the glass, the white flowers, her father's lined face across from hers, all of it still present and newly strange. "She was a senator from Naboo," Bail continued. "Brilliant, brave. She fought for the Republic when others had already begun selling it by degrees. She was—" His voice softened into an old ache. "She was extraordinary." Leia barely heard the rest. A name she had never possessed now rang inside her with the violent intimacy of recognition, delayed too long. Padme. The dead woman inside Vader's voice. The dead woman whose shape he had been trying to find in her face. Why would he say her name to me? Bail closed his eyes briefly. Because he knew her once. How? No answer. How? She repeated. Bail rose and crossed to the window, hands clasped behind his back like a man holding himself upright by discipline alone. Outside, Alderaan's night lay clear and cold over the mountains. "He was not always Darth Vader," Bail said. The words froze the air. There was another name before the armor. Another life. Leia stood as well, unable to remain seated inside the tightening world. Who was he? Bail turned. Anakin Skywalker. She knew the name. Everyone with any education knew it in fragments. A hero of the Clone Wars, a Jedi turned traitor, a figure broken by the end of the Republic into something contradictory, and half buried by propaganda. But the name meant nothing until she saw the look in Bale's eyes and understood there was more, far more, waiting like a drop below fog. And what was he to her? Bale's voice became very gentle. Her husband. The floor did not give way, the walls did not tremble. Yet Leia felt as though she had missed a step in darkness and was still falling through the absence of ground. No, she said, not because it was impossible, but because it rearranged too much too quickly. No, that cannot be. It can. And Vader knows who I am. Not fully, Bale said, and the phrasing itself was a terror. Not consciously. If he did, we would already be dead. What he sees in you first is her. The horror of it moved through her in layers. Not his daughter. Her. The dead woman. The mother she had never met. He had looked at her and found resemblance before blood, loss before kinship, obsession before recognition. Bale stepped closer. Leia, listen to me. Whatever he feels, whatever this fixation is, it is not love. It is not even memory in any honest form. It is grief twisted by guilt and power and all the things he destroyed in himself long ago. She stared past him, seeing every strange encounter anew. The questions, the pauses, the restraint that had felt less merciful than predatory, the hand stopping at her cheek, the name breathed like prayer and injury together. He wasn't seeing me, she whispered. No. He was seeing her through me. Bale's silence was confirmation. Something fierce and cold settled into place within her. Not only fear, not only disgust, a sharper thing. The refusal to be erased by someone else's ruin. What else have you hidden from me? Bale flinched, and she understood in that instant that there was still more. Enough more to wound him in the carrying of it. He answered anyway, because love sometimes took the shape of a blade reluctantly offered. He is your father. It would have been easier if she had hated the word immediately. Instead, there was only blankness. A void so clean it swallowed feeling before feeling could become name. Then, slowly, sensations returned in cruel order. The mask, the breathing, the gaze that had unsettled her for reasons deeper than politics, her own instinctive fury toward him. Its heat inexplicably personal from the first moment. No, she said again, but this time the word was smaller. Bale reached for her. She stepped back. I'm sorry, he said. She laughed once, softly, because no other sound fit. He looked at me and saw my mother. Yes. He looked at his own daughter and still chose fantasy. Bale did not deny it. That night she did not sleep. The palace rooms of Alderaan were too gentle for the knowledge inside her. Moonlight lay across the floor in silver bars. Her reflection in the window became unbearable. She kept turning away from it and finding herself in mirrors elsewhere. Padme's daughter. Anakin Skywalker's daughter. Bail Organa's child by every law that mattered except blood. And in the mind of the Empire's executioner, not even herself at all. Only a surface on which a dead woman might be painted again if he stared hard enough. By morning, rage had clarified into purpose. If Vader wanted a final encounter, he would have one. The invitation came sooner than expected. A sealed message from Imperial channels requested Princess Leia Organa's presence on Coruscant for a private review of Alderaanian relief clearances. The location attached was not a government office, but an old Republic observatory tower overlooking the Senate district, a place long since emptied of official function. High, isolated, steeped in the architecture of a government Padme had once loved and Vader had helped strangle. Leia read the summons twice. Then she accepted. Bail argued, pleaded, forbade, relented. In the end, he knew what she knew. Running would not end it. Not now. Not when the truth itself had become the center toward which everything was already turning. The tower stood above Coruscant, like a memory that refused renovation. Its pale stone had weathered into softness, unlike the Empire's preferred brutal surfaces. Spiral ramps wound upward around an open core, through which air moved in whispering currents. Long windows looked out over the impossible descent of the city, level upon level vanishing into haze, and lights so distant they resembled stars drowned upside down. Leia wore white, not because he had asked. He had not dared ask so plainly, because she chose to turn his delusion into indictment. The gown was formal, senatorial, severe in its lines. Bail saw it before she departed and closed his eyes briefly, understanding at once the cruelty and courage of the choice. If Vader wanted to confront the ghost he had built from memory, then let him see how little power that ghost held over the living woman who wore its echo-like armor. He was waiting near the top, black against the high windows, motionless, vast. The city's pale light made the edges of his silhouette shimmer faintly, as though the air itself distrusted him. Leia climbed the last curve of the spiral slowly, refusing haste. Each step rang in the tower's hollow center. The ascent felt ceremonial, almost obscene in its resemblance to a trial where verdict and confession had arrived before either speaker. When she reached the platform, Vader turned. For a long moment neither moved. The wind at that height made soft sounds through the arches. Far below, traffic moved in glowing streams, the living bloodstream of a capital too immense to care what grief unfolded above it. "You came," he said. "You made certain I would." His gaze traveled over the white of her gown and stopped there. She watched the blow land, not visibly. The mask allowed too little. Yet something in the stillness changed. Some old chamber opened. Some remembered pain became briefly indistinguishable from desire. "This place," Leia said, "was once used for Republic ceremonies." "Yes. You chose it for a reason. I chose it because truth deserves height. Or because memory does." The wind pressed fabric against her legs. Vader remained silent. Then, with a deliberateness that made the air tighten, he said, "You remind me of someone I loved." There it was, at last. Not the whole truth. Not yet. But the nearest he had come to naked speech since Mustafar turned his life into iron and smoke. "I know," Leia said. He tilted his head slightly. "Bail told you." "He told me enough. That is unfortunate." "No," she said. "What is unfortunate is that you looked at me and saw a grave to dig in." The words struck. She felt it. Vader took one step closer. "You do not understand." "Then explain it." His voice lowered. "When you speak, I hear what the galaxy lost. When you stand against corruption, I see what should not have died. The Force does not place such resemblances idly. There are currents deeper than blood, deeper than chance. Something remains. Something returned." Leia stared at him, not because the delusion shocked her anymore, but because hearing it aloud revealed its full ugliness. He had wrapped obsession in mysticism. He had taken the violence of projection and dressed it in the language of destiny, so he would not have to face how monstrous it truly was. She is dead, Leia said. His breathing thickened. Nothing is ever wholly lost. To you, perhaps, because losing her honestly would mean living with what you did. The black helmet angled downward slightly, as if the sentence had physical weight. Leia stepped nearer now, into danger with the steadiness of someone who had decided fear would not own the scene. You have been watching me, she said, following me, summoning me, studying me like a relic you might restore if you found the correct light. Not because you care who I am, because you cannot bear who she is not. She lives in you. No. The word cracked across the tower. She does not live in me for you. His hand flexed once at his side. You speak with her convictions. I speak with mine. You carry her strength. I carry my own. You look at me as she once did. That almost undid her, not from pity but fury. No, Leia said, voice shaking now because truth did not always arrive elegantly. I do not. My mother looked at you and hoped there was still good in you. I look at you and see what murdered that hope. The city wind roared once through the arches and fell away. Vader stood like a dark monument under judgment. She would have understood, he said, and the desperation hidden in the sentence made it grotesque. If she had lived, she would have understood what the galaxy required, what weakness forced me to become. Leia's expression hardened into something bright and merciless. You are wrong. She would have hated what you became, not because you were strong, but because you were weak in every way that mattered. You mistook possession for love, fear for protection, control for devotion. You destroyed the Republic. You destroyed the Jedi. And when she died, you made her death into a mirror, so you would never have to face yourself except through loss. His respirator dragged harshly. Still, she did not stop. And then, she said, each word a deliberate blade, you looked at your own daughter and chose fantasy over truth. Silence. Not the silence of pause. The silence of a universe splitting. Vader did not move. He might have been carved from the tower itself, except that the sound of his breathing had changed. It had become uneven, ragged with something far more terrible than rage. The mask hid his face, but not the collapse traveling inward through everything beneath it. He knew. Not because Bail had told him, not because some clear paternal instinct had awakened nobly at last. He knew because the sentence forced pieces into alignment all at once. The resemblance, the draw, the impossible echo in the force he had refused to name. Padme, Bail, Alderaan, the age, the anger, the fire, daughter. The word widened inside him like an abyss. He saw Padme on Mustafar, one hand over her belly, the other reaching toward him. He saw the medical chamber where he had learned she was dead. He heard the Emperor's voice telling him the children had not survived. He saw Leia standing before him in white, defiant and alive, and wounded by him in the exact shape his grief had taken. No, he said. It was almost human. Leia's eyes shone but did not soften. Yes. You lie. I wish I did. The city beneath them seemed to tilt. The height of the tower, which had not touched him until now, became suddenly immense. Not fear of falling, fear of seeing. Fear of what vision required when it could no longer be blurred by obsession. He had wanted Padme returned. Instead, he had found the living proof that she had not entirely vanished from the world. And he had failed, even that miracle. He had not seen his daughter. He had seen only the woman he had lost, and tried to drag from death through resemblance, through pressure, through memory, through the desecration of another self. His hand lifted toward Leia again, this time not with delusion, with horror. She stepped back at once. The movement stopped him more completely than any blade could have, because it was not theatrical fear now, not the ordinary caution his presence bred in strangers. It was personal recoil. The recoil of a daughter from a father who had earned no other response. "Do not," she said. The glove hung in the air a moment, then lowered. Vader looked at her, and for the first time the resemblance became unbearable. It did not vanish. It sharpened. He could see Padme in the curve of her face. Yes, but now also the independent soul that had grown beneath Bael's care, beyond Naboo, beyond him, beyond every story he had told himself to survive. Leia was not vessel, not return, not second chance. She was consequence. She was inheritance, without permission. She was what had lived on after both love and murder, and he had nearly erased her by insisting she exist, only as echo. "I did not know," he said. Leia laughed once, and there was no mirth in it. "That is supposed to comfort me." "No." "Good." She moved toward the outer arch, keeping distance between them, the city's abyss visible beyond her shoulder. White against sky and stone, she seemed for a moment like every memory he had ever ruined, converging into one final refusal. "I came here," she said, "because I wanted you to hear it from me. I am not Padme. I am not your redemption. I am not a ghost sent to forgive you or finish what you broke. Whatever blood we share belongs to my mother as much as it does to you. And I choose her." The sentence tore through him more savagely than accusation. He could kill senators Jedi, whole worlds if ordered. He could survive flame and surgery and the Emperor's leash. But this choice, spoken plainly, the living child of Padme Amidala, choosing the dead mother over the father still standing before her. This was a verdict no dark side discipline could blunt. "Leia," he said. Not princess. Not with rank between them. Her name. She flinched as if even that had become theft. "You do not get to use my name like that," she said. He stopped. The wind pulled at her sleeves. Somewhere far below a transport horn rose faintly and disappeared. "There is nothing," she continued, "you can say that will make this less vile. You searched for my mother in me because you could not bear to bury her honestly. You turned grief into possession. And now that you know what I am to you, what I have always been to you, it changes nothing that matters. It changes everything. For you." He had no defense against that, only the widening ruin of clarity. He took one step forward without intending to. She moved back at once, heel near the outer edge of the platform, where the stone narrowed beside the arch. Instinct jolted through him, sudden and violent. "Stop!" he said. Leia saw it then, the awful fracture between what he had been in the last months and what he was in this exact instant. Obsession had died. In its place stood something rawer and perhaps, in another life, more redeemable. but she did not trust it. Could not. Trust was for fathers who arrived before damage. The tower seemed to sway around them in the rushing height. "I should never have come," she said. "Yes," he answered, because truth had stripped him of lies at last. "But I am glad you did." Her eyes filled with furious disbelief. "How dare you?" Because even now selfishness remained in him. Even now part of him treasured the fact that she had come at all, that she had stood before him and spoken his name with hatred instead of absence. He saw the ugliness of that impulse as soon as it formed, and despised it. Yet despising it did not erase it. The wind surged harder. Leia turned toward the stair, choosing escape over further speech. For one blind instant he reached after her, not to seize, not to command, only from a reflex older than the armor, the reflex of someone watching a beloved figure move away from a precipice. His glove caught only air. She jerked from the motion, misreading it, and her foot slipped on the worn edge of the stone. The world narrowed. White fabric flashed against the drop. A cry tore from below the level of thought. Vader lunged. His hand closed around her forearm just as her body pitched beyond the ledge. The impact slammed him to one knee. Leia swung out over the abyss, the city opening beneath her in impossible depth. One hand clawing at empty air while the other was locked in the grip of the father she did not want. For a second that felt outside time, everything held. The tower, the wind, the weight of her suspended between them. Vader's arm strained, servos whined, the stone under his knee cracked. Leia looked up. The terror in her face was real. So was the revulsion. He had saved her, or caught her, or delayed the fall he had caused. None of it mattered. The moment resembled rescue, and still felt like violation. "Do not let go," he said. She was trembling with effort, with height, with fury. "I would rather fall than belong to you." The words hit harder than her weight. His grip tightened involuntarily. For a terrible instant he understood how thin the bridge was between saving and possessing, between holding on for someone's life and holding on because one could not bear their departure. He saw the abyss in himself with merciless clarity. If he pulled her up, would it be mercy or selfishness? If he let her fall, would it be despair or surrender? There was no pure choice left, only damaged ones. Leia read something in his stillness, and her expression changed. Not fear this time. Disgust. That finished it. With a sound almost like pain, Vader thrust upward. The force surged with the motion. Leia's body swung, struck the stone lip, and rolled hard onto the platform beyond his reach. She scrambled backward at once, breathing in ragged bursts, white sleeves smeared with dust. He remained kneeling by the edge, hand outstretched into emptiness. Neither spoke. At last Leia rose unsteadily. "You do not get credit," she said, voice shaking, "for not killing me." He lowered his hand. "No," he said. She backed toward the spiral stair, never turning away from him. At the threshold she stopped once more. Her face was pale, hard, magnificent, in the exact way Padme's had once been when choosing principle over safety. But it was not Padme's face. He knew that now with a finality beyond denial. "This is the last thing you will ever have from me," she said. "The truth." Then she was gone down the winding descent, footsteps fading into the tower's hollow core. Vader did not follow. He stayed kneeling at the edge until the cracked stone beneath him crumbled into powder and fell. The city below swallowed it without notice. Traffic moved, lights burned. Somewhere far beneath, a life he had no right to touch was returning to orbiting ships and Alderaanian skies, and a father who had earned the name more completely than blood ever could. At length he rose. The wind passed through the arches and over the black armor, finding every seam. It felt like cold from another century. He looked out over Coruscant and saw none of its grandeur, only distance, only the great artificial canyon of the city stretching downward until vision failed. Height no longer resembled power. It resembled punishment, a place from which one could see everything too late. Padme was gone. Not merely dead. Gone from the delusion that had preserved her in a cruel half-life inside his mind. He could no longer place her inside Leia without feeling immediate shame. He could no longer tell himself the Force had returned what he had lost. The fantasy had died on the tower when his daughter named it for what it was. And Leia was gone too, though living. Gone from his reach. Gone from any future that imagined confession could undo damage. Gone into a moral universe where her mother remained beloved, and he remained the shape that had destroyed her. That was justice. Below, the towers of the old Senate district shone pale beneath the dark. He remembered Padme walking those avenues in white and crimson, carrying hope like a light too delicate for the era she had been born into. He remembered believing once that love meant preventing loss at any cost. Then later, that power could reverse consequence. Then later still, that grief justified whatever form it took, if the ache beneath it was real enough. All lies. Love had not been possession. Memory had not been resurrection. Grief had not become sacred because it refused burial. He stood alone in the high wind until the first hints of false dawn touched the far reaches of Coruscant's sky lanes. The city brightened by degrees, each layer of light exposing more of the endless structures below. No ghost appeared in the glass. No gentle voice forgave him. No miracle bent the years back into mercy. Only the truth remained. When his daughter had stood before him, he had not seen her. When he finally did, she was already leaving. The tower held the silence after her like a wound. And Darth Vader, lord of an empire vast enough to crush worlds, found there was no power in the galaxy great enough to pull one living woman back across the distance his own blindness had made.